January 8, 2016 was David Bowie's 69th birthday and the release date of his final album, Blackstar. Nobody knew that day that Bowie was calling the most important people in his life, one by one, to say goodbye. When producer Tony Visconti heard him whisper on the phone, "I've got something to tell you," he noticed the mixture of excitement and sadness in Bowie's voice. 2 days later, the world would lose him, but the words spoken in those final conversations would live forever in the hearts of those he loved. If you love music history's most touching farewell stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because we'll keep uncovering rock history's most emotional moments. On the morning of January 8, 2016, when David Bowie woke up in his New York apartment, the pain in his body was more intense than ever. His 18-month battle with liver cancer had entered its final stage, and doctors had told him he had very little time left. But that morning wasn't just another day of illness for Bowie. It was both his 69th birthday and the day his life's final masterpiece, Blackstar, would meet the world. He'd shared a small birthday breakfast with Iman and Alexandria. Though he didn't have the strength to blow out candles, seeing the love in his daughter's eyes gave him power. Alexandria was only 15 and couldn't fully grasp the seriousness of her father's condition. Bowie tried to hide his pain to protect her innocence, making an effort to appear strong when she was around. After breakfast, when Iman began planning Bowie's daily activities, she noticed he had a different kind of energy. It was unusual for her husband to pull out his phone contacts list and examine it so carefully. "I need to make a few important phone calls today," Bowie had said, with certainty in his voice. Iman couldn't understand what lay behind those words at the time, but looking back, she would realize that Bowie had begun his farewell tour. This birthday wasn't just a celebration, it was also the beginning of carefully orchestrated goodbyes. Bowie had decided to systematically reach out to the most important people in his life. Each phone conversation would provide proper closure to relationships that had lasted decades. That afternoon, Bowie first called Tony Visconti, one of his closest collaborators. Visconti had been working with Bowie since the 1960s and had produced 12 of his albums, including Blackstar. When the phone rang, Visconti immediately noticed something different about Bowie's voice. He said, "I've got something to tell you," and he was whispering to me on the phone. Visconti would remember years later, the reason Bowie was whispering was that he was with his family and didn't want to upset them. After moving to another room, he excitedly announced, "I'm going to be a grandfather." He'd learned that Duncan Jones and his wife Sarandon were expecting a baby, and this news brought him immense joy. But the most significant part of the conversation came next. Bowie began telling Visconti about his future plans. He told me that he was going to make another album he started writing. This was incredible because despite being so ill, Bowie was still creative. "Right after we get over the holidays, we'll get together and I'll let you hear the music," he had said. Visconti sensed an unusual determination in Bowie's voice. It was as if he needed something to anchor him to the future. But at the end of the conversation, Bowie's words, "Thank you for everything, Tony," concerned Visconti. These words felt like a summary of their decades-long friendship and carried a sense of finality. One of Bowie's regular Sunday Skype sessions was with Gary Oldman. The two had become close friends over the years and made weekly catch-up calls. On that final Sunday, though Oldman noticed fatigue in Bowie's voice, he saw that his sense of humor was still intact. The conversation began with ordinary topics, mutual friends, current projects, industry gossip, but Oldman noticed that Bowie's breathing pattern was different. He would occasionally pause and carefully choose his words, yet his characteristic wit was still there. At the end of the call, they experienced a technical difficulty. When trying to terminate the Skype connection, there was a problem, and Bowie got stuck on screen. Normally patient, Bowie became slightly irritated by this situation. "All right, talk to you next week," he said, then began repeatedly pressing the disconnect button. In the final moment, typical Bowie humor emerged. Go away," he said while pressing the button, then finally laughed and said, "Farts off." This outburst was pure Bowie personality, his ability to find humor even in serious situations. Oldman would later describe this moment as "so wonderfully David." This last interaction showed that Bowie's core personality remained unchanged despite his illness. Even while approaching death, he could maintain that characteristic irreverence and humor. An unexpected name was on Bowie's phone call list: Susan Sarandon. The two had worked together in the 1983 film The Hunger and had a brief romantic relationship. Years later, they took different paths but maintained mutual respect. When Bowie called Sarandon that January evening, she was surprised. In recent months, they had begun to reconnect and had conversations about some things that needed to be said. This final call was the culmination of that healing process. Sarandon later revealed that the conversation topics included their shared memories, missed opportunities, and mutual forgiveness. Bowie apologized for past misunderstandings and expressed his appreciation for Sarandon's talent. "I was so fortunate to be able to see him when he told me what was going on with him," Sarandon would say later. Interestingly, Sarandon received this call after taking a sleep aid and initially thought it was a dream. But when she checked her phone records the next morning, she realized it had been a real conversation. This detail emphasized the surreal quality of the call and reflected the dreamlike nature of Bowie's final days. This conversation demonstrated Bowie's desire to bring proper closure to past relationships. He wanted to make peace with every important person in his life. One of the most emotional calls was definitely with Duncan Jones. Bowie's firstborn son had built a successful career as a filmmaker, and his father was proud of him. The fact that Duncan's first child was expected held extra special significance for Bowie. During the Christmas holidays, Bowie had prepared a special surprise for Duncan. He requested that the doctor write the baby's gender on a card without him or Duncan seeing it. On Christmas Day, Bowie personally revealed the baby's gender. It would be a boy and would eventually be named Sarandon David Jones. This moment was one of the last expressions of pure joy for Bowie. Knowing he would become a grandfather gave him a sense that his legacy would continue. Duncan would later say, "We found the time to do all of the family stuff that we wanted to do, got a chance to spend some time together, have our talks and say our goodbyes." Bowie gave Duncan career advice and shared wisdom about dealing with challenges in the creative field. Most importantly, he repeated the words, "I'm proud of you," multiple times. This affirmation would become a lifelong treasure for Duncan. Despite the complexity of father-son relationships, mutual understanding and love found full expression during this final period. Bowie supported Duncan's artistic vision and showed enthusiasm about future projects. Bowie's friendship with Queen guitarist Brian May spanned decades. They had developed a close bond after their Under Pressure collaboration and maintained mutual respect despite industry politics. In that final phone call, Bowie transmitted an important message to May: "Keep the music alive." This simple phrase carried profound meaning. Bowie was concerned about the future of rock music and emphasized the responsibility of May's generation. The conversation discussed the current state of the music industry. Bowie acknowledged that the digital age had created both opportunities and challenges for artists. He gave May advice about supporting younger musicians and the necessity of preserving rock music's integrity. May detected an unusual urgency in Bowie's voice. He would usually be relaxed in their normal conversations, but this time he felt the pressure of conveying an important message. It was like he was passing the torch, May would say years later. The most touching aspect of this call was Bowie's specific praise of May's guitar playing. "Your guitar work influenced generations," he said, acknowledging May's contribution to rock history. This recognition was the ultimate compliment from one professional musician to another. While phone calls with friends and colleagues were important, Bowie's most intimate conversations occurred privately with Iman. Throughout their 24-year marriage, they had developed a deep spiritual connection, and in the final days this bond became even stronger. On the evening of January 9th, Iman and Bowie sat in the living room of their New York apartment drinking tea. When Alexandria came home from school, the family spent time together. Bowie held Iman's hand and talked quietly about the immediate future. "I need you to be strong for Alexandria," Bowie said, his voice barely a whisper. Iman understood that her husband was making final preparations. They discussed practical matters, financial arrangements, Alexandria's education, management of family assets. But most importantly, they talked about emotional support systems. Bowie promised Iman that he would always love her and told her that their marriage was the greatest achievement of his life. Iman responded with tears but maintained her strength for her husband. They both knew that time was limited, but love was eternal. These private moments had a different quality from the public phone calls. Here, masks dropped and raw humanity emerged. Bowie set aside the starman persona and became just David, a husband, father, and human being approaching life's end. The evening of January 9 was calm but emotionally charged in the Bowie household. The phone calls had been completed, and Bowie experienced a sense of completion. Important conversations were finished, messages transmitted, love expressed. Alexandria was doing homework in the living room, occasionally looking at her father and smiling. Bowie tried to maintain normal behavior to preserve his daughter's innocence. Sometimes he suppressed his coughs and hid his pain. Iman noticed that her husband's energy level was extremely low. His movements were slower, his breathing labored, but his mental clarity remained intact, and his emotional presence was full. During the evening meal, the family sat together and had quiet conversation. Bowie asked questions about Alexandria's school projects and showed genuine interest. This effort to maintain normalcy was a final act of love for his family. As bedtime approached, Bowie said goodnight to Iman and Alexandria with extra long hugs. These embraces were the beginning of unspoken farewells. Everyone sensed that something was different that night, but direct acknowledgement was avoided to protect Alexandria. In those final days, Bowie's medical condition was rapidly deteriorating. The liver cancer had reached an advanced stage, and organ functions showed significant decline. The palliative care team made regular visits, and pain management was the primary concern. But Bowie's mental state demonstrated remarkable strength. The decision to make phone calls was a conscious choice as part of end-of-life preparation. Professional grief counselors described this behavior as anticipatory closure, a dying person's desire to conclude relationships with proper endings. The medical team was impressed by Bowie's determination. Normally, terminal patients experience withdrawal and isolation, but Bowie adopted the opposite approach. He strengthened connections, increased communication, and intensified expressions of love. Despite his pain levels, Bowie reserved energy for phone conversations. This effort required tremendous willpower and was a testament to his commitment to loved ones. Every call was an emotional victory, despite the physical struggle. The morning of January 10 started with unusual quiet. Bowie's breathing had become more difficult and speech required effort. Iman and Alexandria were beside him, holding hands and providing silent comfort. Phone calls were no longer possible, but Bowie's consciousness was clear. He maintained communication through his eyes and gave responses with hand squeezes. Love's expression no longer needed words. The medical team arrived and made final assessments. Bowie's vital signs indicated that the end was approaching. The family gathered around the bed, and a peaceful vigil began. No more phone calls were needed. Everyone important had already been contacted. Messages had been transmitted. As he approached his final breath, Bowie was surrounded by love. The warmth and care from the phone conversations filled the room. Every person he had called was spiritually present in that moment. On January 10, 2016, David Bowie peacefully passed away, surrounded by Iman and Alexandria. The news of his death shocked the world, but those who received final phone calls had a different experience. They had closure, they had final words, they had proper goodbyes. Tony Visconti immediately understood that their last conversation had truly been final. "I wasn't, however, prepared for it," he would say later, but he was grateful to have been able to exchange those last words. Gary Oldman treasured that humorous final moment and valued it as the last glimpse of Bowie's authentic personality. Duncan Jones announced his father's death on social media. "Very sorry and sad to say it's true. I'll be offline for a while. Love to all." These simple words conveyed profound grief, but also showed the strength he had inherited from his father. The recipients of the phone calls bonded over their shared experience. They understood that they belonged to a privileged group. people who had heard David Bowie's final words. This connection was maintained over the years, and memories were shared. In 2020, when transcripts of some of these final conversations were publicly shared, the worldwide emotional response was overwhelming. Fans realized that their hero was thinking of others, even in his final moments, expressing love, demonstrating gratitude. "Thank you for everything," to Tony Visconti. "Keep the music alive," to Brian May. "I'm proud of you," to Duncan Jones. "I love you," to Iman. These simple phrases created profound impact because their authenticity was unquestionable. No performance, no persona, just a human being expressing genuine emotions while approaching life's end. Music historians considered these final phone calls Bowie's greatest performance, not performed on stage, but in the heart. The audience wasn't global, but personal, yet the impact was more powerful than any concert. David Bowie's final phone calls weren't just a rock star's farewell. They were the purest expression of human love. Every call, every word, even every silence carried deep meaning. In those final hours, Bowie set aside the starman persona and became pure David, a loving husband, proud father, loyal friend. These conversations showed that the greatest legacy isn't money or fame, but the impressions of love left in people's hearts. Bowie's final phone calls demonstrated an eternal truth. Relationships matter, words matter, love matters. Today, when we listen to Heroes or Space Oddity, we hear not just songs, but also the echoes of those final conversations. Because music may be immortal, but love, real, authentic, unconditional love, is truly eternal. David Bowie's final words are still being spoken, still touching hearts, still providing inspiration. And perhaps this is his greatest song, Words of Love, performed one last time for the people who mattered most.